In the world of A Song and Ice and Fire, dragons stand as the ultimate symbol of power, destruction, and magic. These legendary creatures are not mere animals, but beings of immense importance, capable of reshaping the very landscape of Westeros. The story of dragons extends far beyond the borders of Westeros, reaching deep into the ancient histories of Essos, the shadowed lands of Asshai, and the icy reaches of the north. Their fire forged empires, their wings cast shadows over kingdoms, and their roars reverberated through the pages of history. As we delve into the legacy of these awe-inspiring creatures, we will explore the stories of every dragon that ever lived in the known world, tracing their origins, their riders, the feats they accomplished, and their eventual fate. We will also explore what is known about the wild dragons, ice dragons, sea dragons, and even the worms that lurk beneath the earth. From the ancient days of the Valyrian Freehold to the fiery fall of King's Landing, the dragons of Westeros left an indelible mark on the world. Welcome to our latest episode on the world of Ice and Fire, where we will explore the epic tales and rich histories of the peoples and events that shaped the land of Westeros, Essos, and beyond. Today we delve into the history of the dragons, upon whose mighty wings the pages of history are turned, and in the as yet unwritten conclusion to the books, may yet decide the fate of humanity. To fully understand the dragons, we must first delve into their origins. The origins of the dragons are shrouded in mystery, steeped in myth and legend. Some say that dragons first appeared in the shadowed lands of Asshai, where the dark and powerful magics of the east gave birth to these fire-breathing beasts. Theories abound about their true nature, with some believing that they were creatures of pure fire, born from the volcanic mountains and the fiery depths of the earth, while others speculate that they are the descendants of ancient gods and remnants of a time when magic was still raw and untamed. Dragons are not merely beasts of war, but creatures of myth and legend, tied intrinsically to the rise and fall of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known, Valyria. According to the Maesters of the Citadel, dragons were first tamed and bred by the Valyrians, who used them to forge an empire that stretched across much of Essos. However, there are other, older legends that suggest dragons may have originated in the shadowed lands beyond Asshai, a region steeped in dark magic and ancient secrets. Asshai, a city located to the far southeast of Essos, is a place of great mystery. It is said that the priests and sorcerers of Asshai possess knowledge that predates even the Valyrian Freehold. Some believe that dragons were first brought to Valyria from Asshai, where they had long been worshipped as gods or tamed as pets by the ancient Shadowbinders. This theory is supported by the fact that dragon eggs are often found in the Shadowlands, a desolate and dangerous region where few dare to venture. According to several legends, dragons are creatures of fire that were birthed from the fiery heart of the world, deep within the earth. This would explain why dragons are drawn to heat, and why they can thrive in the most extreme conditions. Some maesters even speculate that the first dragons emerged from volcanoes, with the Valyrians discovering and mastering them in the fiery mountains of their homeland. The Valyrians, a civilization known for their mastery of fire and blood, were the first to tame these mighty beasts, binding them to their will through sorcery and knowledge long lost to the world. The Valyrian Freehold, a powerful empire that spanned much of Essos, owed its dominance to these creatures. Dragons were not merely tools of war for the Valyrians, they were the very essence of their power, their flames a manifestation of the Valyrian ambition. The 14 Flames, a chain of towering volcanoes surrounding the ancient city of Valyria, were said to be the cradle of the dragons. Here, in the heart of the Valyrian Peninsula, the first dragons were hatched, their eggs warmed by the molten rock and nurtured by the magical energies that permeated the land. The Valyrians, who had settled in this land of fire and brimstone, discovered the dragons and began to master them, forging a bond between man and beast that would elevate them to the status of gods among men. The Valyrians bred dragons in large numbers, using them to conquer and subjugate vast territories. Their knowledge of dragon lore was unparalleled, allowing them to ride and command these creatures with an ease that no other civilization could replicate. It was said that only those with the blood of the Dragon Lords could bond with these fearsome beasts, a connection that was both mystical and profound. This bond was more than just a rider commanding their steed, it was a union of minds, a merging of fates. The dragon and its rider were one, bound together until death. However, the origins of dragons go beyond the Valyrians. Some maesters and scholars speculate that the dragons are creatures of pure fire, born of the earth's molten core, and shaped by ancient forgotten magic. Others believe that they are the remnants of a primordial race, creatures that once roamed the skies at the dawn of time. The truth remains elusive, buried beneath layers of history and myth. Some tales speak of ancient dragon lords in far-flung regions, such as Yi Ti and Leng, who might have had their own dragons long before the rise of Valyria. Yet it was the Valyrians who mastered them, who learned to bind their wills with those of these fire-breathing beasts, turning them into the most feared weapons the world has ever known. During the height of the Valyrian freehold, dragons were as common as horses, their fire-breathing prowess used to forge an empire that stretched across continents. The Valyrians used dragons to conquer the Rhoynar, the Andals, and countless other peoples. These dragons, whose names are now lost to history, were the mightiest creatures the world had ever seen. They were not the small, stunted dragons of later years, but great beasts, capable of laying waste to entire armies with a single breath of fire. The Valyrians rode these dragons into battle, using their immense power to subjugate their enemies. The sight of a Valyrian dragon lord atop a roaring dragon was enough to strike fear into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. These dragons were the ultimate weapon, capable of turning the tide of any battle and ensuring the dominance of the Valyrian freehold. The only named dragon from the Valyrian freehold epoch that did not belong to the Targaryens was known as Terax, and her rider was Rhaenyra Beleris. Rhaenyra was a noblewoman from Old Valyria, who lived out her dreams of adventure by flying Terax to Sothorios, where she would continue to fly her mighty mount until they found the edge of the continent. After some 3 years of naught else but jungles, mountains and deserts, Rhaenyra deigned to return home. Upon her arrival in the peninsula, she declared that Sothorios was at least the same size as Essos, if not greater, and was a land truly without end. Her fate and that of her mount is not elaborated upon further. The freehold itself was a marvel of ancient magic and power. Valyria was not a traditional empire, but a confederation of autonomous lords, each controlling vast lands and armies, united by their shared mastery of dragons. These dragon lords lived in towering palaces of fused stone, their halls lit by the fire of dragon flame. The skies above Valyria were filled with dragons, their shadows casting darkness over the land, even in the brightest days. The dragon lords rode to war with armies of slaves and soldiers, their dragons laying waste to cities and fortresses alike. However, with great power came great peril, and the capacity for utter destruction. The Valyrians, in their hubris, believed that they could control these mighty creatures, but dragons are not easily tamed. They are creatures of fire and fury, bound to no man or woman. The doom of Valyria, a cataclysmic event that shattered the Valyrian freehold, is believed by some to have been caused by the dragons themselves. Whether this is true or not, what is certain is that the dragons of Valyria perished in the fires of the doom, their bones and ashes scattered across the smoking ruins of their empire. The doom itself is a mystery that haunts the history of the world. What caused the cataclysm that shattered Valyria remains unknown, but the consequences were catastrophic. The sky turned red as blood, the earth cracked open, and the 14 flames erupted in fury, drowning the peninsula in fire and ash. In the span of a single day and night, the mightiest empire the world had ever known was reduced to ruin. The dragons of Valyria perished in flames by the hundreds, their bodies consumed by the very fire that had given them life. After the doom, only a handful of dragons survived across Essos. However, the peoples of the cities they resided in rose up and slaughtered the beasts en masse. Another dragon lord who survived the doom was Aurion, who had been living in faraway Cahor during the cataclysm. However, after he made his way to claim the remnants of Old Valyria with a force of some 30,000 men, he was never heard from again. It is presumed that Aurion, his men and his unnamed dragon all perished in the attempt at re-establishing the freehold. While the doom of Valyria marked the end of the great dragon lords, one family survived, House Targaryen. The Targaryens fled to the island of Dragonstone before the doom, taking with them the last remaining dragons in the world. These dragons, Balerion, Vhagar and Meraxes, would become legendary in their own right, their names etched into the annals of Westerosi history. Balerion the Black Dread was the largest and most fearsome of the Targaryen dragons. His scales were black as coal, and his fire burned hotter than any other dragon's. He was named after an ancient Valyrian god, and was the last living creature to have seen the freehold in all its glory. Balerion was ridden by Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen king of Westeros, and played a pivotal role in the Targaryen conquest of the Seven Kingdoms. With Balerion, Aegon burned Harrenhal, the greatest castle in Westeros, reducing it to a smouldering ruin. Harren the Black, who had believed his massive fortress to be impervious to any siege, watched in horror as Balerion's flames melted the stone towers as if they were wax. This demonstration of power convinced many lords to bend the knee rather than face the wrath of a dragon. Balerion's power was unmatched, and his presence alone was enough to cow the mightiest lords into submission. Balerion's rider after Aegon was King Maegor the Cruel, whose reign was marked by bloodshed and terror. Maegor used Balerion to enforce his will, burning those who opposed him and using the dragon to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. Maegor also rode Balerion during the Battle of the Great Fork of the Blackwater Rush to great effect. Later, in the Battle Beneath the God's Eye, Balerion once more displayed his unparalleled prowess by easily dispatching Maegor's nephew, Prince Aegon, and his dragon Quicksilver in aerial combat, ensuring that the prince's moniker, the Uncrowned, would remain in perpetuity. Maegor also began the construction of the Dragon Pit, where future Valyrian dragons would be housed. However, after Maegor's death, Balerion returned to Dragonstone. As Balerion aged, he became increasingly difficult to control. The next rider to mount Balerion was Princess Aerea Targaryen, who disappeared with the dragon for more than a year. An unexperienced dragon rider, she was unable to control the immense mount she had initially claimed. With a mind of his own, Balerion brought Aerea to the land of his birth, Old Valyria. Unbeknownst to Balerion, much had changed since the earliest years of his life, and a solitary dragon was no longer the apex predator within the ruins of the Freehold. When he and the princess returned from the desolated ruins of Old Valyria, both were in a horrifying state, with Aerea dying shortly after and Balerion bearing wounds that could only have been inflicted by something even more monstrous than himself. The dragon bore a huge jagged wound down his left side, 9 feet long and still smoking. Following on from this, Prince Viserys Targaryen claimed the dragon. Although at this stage in Balerion's life he struggled to fly, and would only manage a single flight with his new rider around King's Landing. Balerion died less than a year after being claimed by the future king, and with his passing, the world lost the last true dragon of Old Valyria. Balerion lived to an old age, outlasting many of his fellow dragons, and his skull was eventually placed in the Red Keep, a grim reminder of the dragon's destructive power. Balerion's death marked the end of an era, the passing of the last of the truly great dragons. Meraxes, the second of the great Targaryen dragons, was ridden by Rhaenys Targaryen, Aegon's beloved sister wife. Meraxes was silver in colour, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. Together, Rhaenys and Meraxes were instrumental in the Targaryen conquest, bringing fire and blood to Dorne, the last of the 7 kingdoms to resist Targaryen rule. Meraxes was known for her swiftness and agility in the sky, and her flames could reduce entire armies to ash in moments. The sight of Meraxes soaring through the air with Rhaenys astride her back was enough to send armies fleeing in terror. Meraxes' death was a great blow to the Targaryens. During the First Dornish War, the dragon was struck down by a scorpion bolt during the Battle of Hellholt. The bolt pierced Meraxes' eye, and she fell from the sky, crashing to the earth. This tragedy marked the beginning of a long and bloody conflict with Dorne, a kingdom that would resist Targaryen rule for generations to come. The death of Meraxes was a reminder that even dragons, for all their power, were not invincible. Rhaenys also perished in the crash, cementing Meraxes' place in history as one of the most tragic dragons of the Conquest. Vhagar, the third of the great Targaryen dragons, was ridden by Visenya Targaryen, Aegon's other sister wife. Vhagar was slightly smaller than Balerion, but still a monstrous creature, capable of leveling cities with her flames. Vhagar and Visenya were a formidable pair, their bond forged in battle and blood. Together they brought the Stormlands and the Vale to their knees, crushing any who dared to defy them. Vhagar survived both Aegon and Visenya, living for nearly 2 centuries and becoming the most experienced and battle-hardened dragon in Westeros. Vhagar played a pivotal role in the Dance of the Dragons, a brutal Targaryen civil war that would decimate the dragon population of Westeros. Ridden by Prince Aemond Targaryen, Vhagar fought against the forces of Rhaenyra Targaryen, engaging in several legendary battles. Vhagar's death came during the Battle Above the God's Eye, where she and her rider faced off against Prince Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Caraxes. The battle was one of the most epic dragon duels in history, with Vhagar and Caraxes tearing into each other with claws and teeth, their roars echoing across the land. In the end, both dragons fell to their deaths, crashing into the god's eye, their bodies sinking beneath the waters. Vhagar's death marked the end of an era, the passing of one of the greatest dragons to ever live. The arrival of the Targaryens in Westeros marked the beginning of a new era in the continent's history. The Seven Kingdoms, which had once been divided among petty kings and warlords, were united under a single ruler for the first time. Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters Rhaenys and Visenya used their dragons to forge a new order, one that would last for nearly 3 centuries. The Targaryens were not like the other lords of Westeros. They were dragon lords, beings of fire and blood, whose power came not from strength of arms, but from the might of dragons. The conquest of Westeros was not a simple feat, even with the power of dragons at the Targaryens' command. The Seven Kingdoms were divided and fractious, each ruled by a different king, and each fiercely protective of their independence. Aegon and his sisters knew that they could not conquer the continent through brute force alone. They needed to inspire fear and awe in equal measure. The conquest began with the burning of Harrenhal, a fortress so massive it was said to be impregnable. Harrenhal's ruler, Harren the Black, believed that his castle's thick stone walls would protect him from any attack. But Harren had not reckoned with the power of Balerion the Black Dread. Aegon unleashed Balerion upon Harrenhal, and the dragon's fire melted the stone towers, turning them into molten slag. Harren and his sons were burned alive in their great hall, and the fortress was left a smoking ruin. The destruction of Harrenhal was a clear message to the lords of Westeros: resist the Targaryens and face the wrath of a dragon. After Harrenhal, the Targaryens turned their attention to the Stormlands, where they faced King Argilac the Arrogant. Argilac was a proud and stubborn king, unwilling to bend the knee to the Targaryens. He marched out to meet Aegon in battle, but his forces were no match for the might of the dragons. Rhaenys and Meraxes descended upon the Stormlander army, scattering them with dragonfire. Argilac himself was killed in the battle, his body burned beyond recognition. With his death, the Stormlands fell to the Targaryens. The conquest of Westeros was not achieved through force alone. Aegon was a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, willing to make alliances and compromises where necessary. He married into the powerful House Hightower, securing the loyalty of Oldtown, and he accepted the submission of House Stark, with King Torrhen Stark of the North seeing the futility of resisting a force as powerful as the dragons. Aegon's diplomacy was as important as his military might in securing his rule over Westeros. The crowning moment of the conquest came at the Field of Fire, where Aegon and his sisters faced the combined forces of the Reach and the Westerlands. The armies of House Gardener and House Lannister, numbering over 50,000 men, were determined to resist the Targaryens and protect their kingdoms, but they were no match for the power of dragons. Aegon, Rhaenys and Visenya unleashed Balerion, Meraxes and Vhagar upon the enemy, engulfing the battlefield in flames. Thousands of men were burned alive, and the Gardener King was killed, his line extinguished. The Field of Fire was the bloodiest battle of the conquest, and it marked the end of significant resistance to Targaryen rule. With the Seven Kingdoms united under his rule, Aegon established the Iron Throne, a symbol of his power, forged from the swords of his defeated enemies. The Targaryen dynasty was born, and the dragons became the ultimate symbol of their authority. For nearly 3 centuries, the Targaryens would rule Westeros, their dragons ensuring that no one could challenge their supremacy. In addition to the dragons ridden by the Targaryens, there were also several wild dragons that roamed Dragonstone during the height of Targaryen power. These dragons were never tamed or ridden, living in the wild and breeding on their own. The most famous of these wild dragons were Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and the Cannibal. Sheepstealer was named for his habit of preying on the livestock of the smallfolk. He was a brown dragon of moderate size, known for his cunning and ability to evade capture. Sheepstealer was eventually tamed by Nettles, a young girl of unknown parentage, during the Dance of the Dragons. Nettles used a simple but effective method of taming the dragon, feeding him sheep every day until he grew accustomed to her presence. Sheepstealer and Nettles would go on to play a significant role in the dance, although their ultimate fate remains a mystery. Grey Ghost was a pale, shy dragon who lived in the sea caves of Dragonstone and was rarely seen by human eyes. Unlike other dragons, Grey Ghost avoided confrontation and conflict, preferring to hunt fish and whales in the waters around the island. During the Dance of the Dragons, Grey Ghost was killed by Sunfire, the dragon ridden by King Aegon II. The cannibal was the most fearsome of the wild dragons, known for his massive size and violent nature. He was named for his habit of devouring other dragons, including their eggs. The cannibal was never tamed, and even the Targaryens feared him. He lived on Dragonstone, preying on both the wild dragons and the smaller, weaker dragons that were kept by the Targaryens. The cannibal survived the Dance of the Dragons, and his ultimate fate remains unknown, as he vanished after the war and was never seen again. These wild dragons represent the untamed and unpredictable side of their species. Unlike the dragons ridden by the Targaryens, who were bound by blood and magic, the wild dragons were free to live and die by their own rules. Their existence is a reminder that dragons, for all their power, are still creatures of the wild, governed by their own instincts and desires. The Dance of the Dragons was a Targaryen civil war that erupted nearly 2 centuries after the Conquest, and it remains one of the most tragic and destructive conflicts in the history of Westeros. The war was fought between 2 rival factions of the Targaryen family, the Greens, who supported the claim of Aegon II, and the Blacks, who supported the claim of Rhaenyra Targaryen. The Dance of the Dragons was not just a war of men, but a war of dragons, and it resulted in the near extinction of these magnificent creatures. The origins of the dance can be traced back to the reign of King Viserys I Targaryen, who declared his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir. However, upon his death, his second wife, Queen Alicent Hightower, crowned her son Aegon II as king, sparking a brutal conflict over the Iron Throne. Both sides possessed dragons, and these mighty beasts were used to devastating effect throughout the war. Syrax was named after a Valyrian goddess, and she was known for her golden scales and fierce temper. Rhaenyra rode Syrax into battle multiple times during the war, using her to assert her claim to the throne. However, Syrax was not as battle-hardened as some of the other dragons, having spent most of her life in the Dragon Pit. Her death came during the storming of the Dragon Pit, where she was overwhelmed by a mob of angry smallfolk who had turned against the Targaryens. Despite her immense strength, Syrax was brought down by sheer numbers, a tragic end for such a powerful creature. Meraxes, known as the Bloodworm, was one of the most fearsome dragons in the dance. Ridden by Prince Daemon Targaryen, Meraxes was a lean, sinewy beast with blood-red scales. He was known for his ferocity in battle, his roar shaking the very ground beneath him. Meraxes was one of the most experienced dragons, having fought in numerous battles before the dance. His final battle came during the Battle Above the God's Eye, where he faced off against Vhagar. The 2 dragons clashed in a brutal aerial duel, tearing into each other with teeth and claws. In the end, both dragons fell to their deaths, their bodies crashing into the God's Eye, their blood mingling with the waters. Meraxes managed to drag himself onto the shore before succumbing to his injuries, a testament to his strength and determination. Meleys, the Red Queen, was ridden by Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, who was also known as the Queen Who Never Was. Meleys was a swift and agile dragon with scarlet scales and a roar that could shatter stone. Rhaenys and Meleys fought valiantly in the dance, participating in several key battles. Meleys was one of the fastest dragons in Westeros, and she used her speed to great effect in battle. However, both Rhaenys and Meleys met their end during the Battle of Rook's Rest, where they faced off against Sunfire and Vhagar. Despite being outnumbered, Meleys fought bravely, wounding Sunfire before being overwhelmed by the combined might of the 2 dragons. Rhaenys and Meleys fell together, their bodies plummeting to the earth in a fiery spiral. Sunfire the Golden was the dragon ridden by King Aegon II, and he was considered one of the most beautiful dragons ever seen in Westeros. His scales were a brilliant gold, and his flames matched the brightness of his hide. Sunfire was a young dragon, and while he was strong and powerful, he was also somewhat inexperienced in battle. Sunfire suffered grievous wounds during the dance, particularly after his clash with Meleys, and he never fully recovered. His wings were torn, and his body was scarred, but he continued to fight for his rider. Sunfire's end came after Aegon II was poisoned by his own men. Without his rider, the dragon succumbed to his injuries, dying a slow and painful death. Vermithor, known as the Bronze Fury, was one of the largest and oldest dragons in Westeros during the dance. He had been ridden by King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, the Old King, and was a veteran of many battles. During the dance, Vermithor was ridden by Hugh Hammer, a blacksmith's bastard who joined the Black's cause. Vermithor was a fearsome opponent, his bronze scales and massive size making him a formidable force on the battlefield. However, Vermithor's end came during the Second Battle of Tumbleton, where he was ambushed by Seasmoke and Targaryen. Despite his age and experience, Vermithor was overwhelmed by the two younger dragons, and was slain in the skies over Tumbleton. His death marked the loss of one of the last great dragons of Westeros. Other dragons involved in the dance included Arrax, the mount of Lucerys Velaryon, whose colouring was pearlescent white with yellow flame, golden eyes and a golden chest. The young dragon and his rider were slain at the hands of the much larger Vhagar above Shipbreaker Bay, as Aemond chased his nephew from Storm's End back to Dragonstone. Another smaller dragon that existed during the dance was Stormcloud, who was the mount of Prince Aegon the Younger. During the war between the Blacks and the Greens, Stormcloud was sent to Pentos alongside the 9-year-old princeling in order to avoid the conflict. However, en route, they were ambushed by warships allied to the Triarchy. Aegon managed to escape upon Stormcloud's back, barely reaching Dragonstone. However, the dragon was mortally wounded by way of countless arrows piercing his side, in conjunction with a scorpion bolt through his neck. Stormcloud would die within an hour of landing, and Aegon would never take another mount. Jacaerys Velaryon claimed the dragon Vermax, and although his coloration is not described in the books, the House of the Dragon TV show depicts him as having olive-green scales and pale orange wing membranes. Vermax would see action during the Battle in the Gullet, where he attacked the Triarchy fleet and came close to routing their ships. However, the dragon flew too low, and was either wounded by a crossbow bolt to the eye or brought down by a grapnel, causing him to crash into a burning galley. Although Jacaerys managed to avoid the worst of the crash and clung to the wreckage of a ship, he was shot through by a volley of crossbow quarrels and sank to the watery depths. Moondancer was a dragon claimed by Baelor Targaryen, and was a slender pale green dragon with pearl horns, crest and wingbones. In the taking of Dragonstone, Baelor and Moondancer clashed with the wounded Sunfire and Aegon II. Although the fight was evenly matched in the air, with Moondancer's speed and agility matching Sunfire's strength, she was blinded by a blast of flames to her eyes, and both dragons fell to the ground. On the ground, speed meant naught, and the older Sunfire killed Moondancer and devoured her remains. Shrikos was a young she-dragon who had been claimed by Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen. Little is known of this mount apart from the fact she was slaughtered in the Dragon Pit during the riots in King's Landing. A similar fate befell Joffrey Velaryon's mount Meraxes. However, the indomitable beast killed so many of his assailants that it blocked the front entrance to his lair. The rioters would have to attack the dragon from the rear to even trouble it, and even then the beast only died by strangling himself with his own chains while taking the fight to the common folk. Morkel was a dragon who was bound to Jaehaera Targaryen, but never ridden. He was also slain in the storming of the Dragon Pit by a huge man in heavy armour, known as the Burning Knight. It is believed he thrust a spear through the dragon's eye, even as fire rained down upon him. Dreamfire, the mount of Helaena Targaryen, was a pale blue beast with silver markings. Her crests were silver and her wings were a pure pale blue. She did not see any action in the dance and was also killed during the riots. However, she slaughtered more assailants than any of the other dragons in the Dragon Pit combined. A volley of crossbow bolts drove her to madness, and she flew into the great dome of the pit, causing it to crack on impact and buried the dragon and her would-be slayers under tons of rubble. Seasmoke was a pale silver-grey dragon of fighting size who was active during the dance. He had once been ridden by Laena Velaryon before being claimed by Adam of Hull. Seasmoke would take part in the Battle in the Gullet and the fall of King's Landing, before meeting his end in the Second Battle of Tumbleton. Seasmoke was one of the two dragons who took down Bronze Fury at the Second Battle of Tumbleton. The second was Targaryen, the mount of Daeron the Daring. Targaryen was a gorgeous she-dragon with wings of dark cobalt. Her claws, belly and crest were the colour of bright beaten copper, drawing a stark contrast. Uniquely, the dragon's flames were also cobalt blue in colour. Targaryen would see action in the Battle on the Honeywine and the First and Second Battles of Tumbleton before being mortally wounded at the hands of Vermithor. Succumbing to a slow and painful death, Lord Benjicott Blackwood would order Bill Burleigh to slay the beast. He acquiesced and shot 3 arrows into the dragon's eyes. The Dance of the Dragons ultimately led to the near extinction of the Targaryen dragons. The war devastated the Targaryen family and left Westeros in ruins. By the end of the conflict, only a few dragons remained. They were all young and weak, mere shadows of the mighty beasts that had once roamed the skies. The Dance of the Dragons was a turning point in the history of Westeros, a tragic chapter that saw the end of the Age of Dragons and the beginning of the decline of the Targaryen dynasty. After the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryens continued to rule Westeros, but their power was greatly diminished. The dragons, once the source of their might, were now a dying breed. The last dragons born in Westeros were sickly and weak, their flames barely hot enough to light a candle. These dragons were pale shadows of their ancestors, their bodies stunted and their lifespans short. Only 4 dragons would survive the dance. Most prominent amongst them was Silverwing, previously the Mount of Ulf the White. Silverwing avoided much of the Second Battle of Tumbleton, and with her rider poisoned, she made her lair in the Reach on a small island in the Red Lake. Although she had been accustomed to men up until this point, she grew wild in her later years and lived a life of solitude. Silverwing's demise is not remarked upon or detailed. The cannibal would likewise survive the dance, and at the sea burial of Lord Corlys Velaryon, the wild dragon took wing and flew to salute the deceased, or so Archmaester Gildain has written. Shortly thereafter, the mighty beast vanished and was never seen again. The dragon Morning was hatched during the dance, and was bonded to Rhaena Targaryen. The dragon would continue to grow during the peaceful period of the rule of King Aegon III, to the extent that Rhaena was able to take flight upon her. Nothing further is specified as to the fate of the dragon or what occurred in the later years of her life. The final dragon to survive the conflict was Sheepstealer, who fled to the Vale with her rider Nettles. The latter was named a traitor. For a time, Nettles and Sheepstealer lived together in a cave within the Western Highlands. Eventually, an army led by Sir Robert Rowan would accidentally chance upon the muddy brown beast and her rider, and in the conflicts that ensued, 16 men were slain and 3 times that amount wounded. The duo were last seen flying even deeper into the Mountains of the Moon, and no sightings have been recorded since this fateful encounter. However, an offshoot clan of the Painted Dogs, who reside within the Vale, came to worship an individual they referred to as a Fire Witch. They would send their boys with gifts to her in order to be able to prove their manhood by facing the flames of her dragon. This offshoot has long been deemed the most savage of the mountain clans, and stories relating to this Fire Witch abound even to this day. Whether this was Nettles and Sheepstealer or some other fire deity, and how this relates to their ultimate fate, remains unknown. The Last Dragon is the name given to the final dragon born in Westeros. This dragon, whose name has been lost to history, was born during the reign of King Aegon III, known as the Dragonbane. Aegon III was haunted by the memory of the Dance of the Dragons, a conflict that had claimed the lives of many of his family members and left him deeply scarred. He hated dragons, seeing them as the source of his family's downfall, and he did little to encourage their breeding. The last dragon was a pitiful creature, small and malformed, with twisted wings and weak flames. It lived a short life, dying not long after its hatching, and with its death, the line of dragons in Westeros came to an end. The death of the last dragon marked the end of an era. The Targaryens, once the masters of the skies, were now reduced to mere mortals, their power and prestige diminished. Without dragons, the Targaryens could no longer command the same fear and respect they had once enjoyed. The death of the dragons also marked the decline of magic in Westeros, as the mystical connection between the Targaryens and their dragons faded into legend. For nearly a century and a half, the world believed that the dragons were gone forever. The Targaryens continued to rule Westeros, but their grip on power weakened with each passing generation. The dragons, once the symbol of their dominance, were now little more than a memory, their bones resting in the crypts beneath the Red Keep. However, the world of A Song in Ice and Fire is a world where magic never truly dies. In the distant land of Essos, far from the halls of power in King's Landing, the last scion of House Targaryen, Daenerys Stormborn, would awaken the dragons once more. Born in exile, Daenerys Targaryen was the last surviving member of the Targaryen dynasty. She was given 3 dragon eggs as a wedding gift, eggs that were believed to be petrified, nothing more than beautiful relics of a bygone age. These eggs, however, were more than just ornaments. They were the last remaining vestiges of the ancient magic that had once birthed the dragons of Valyria. The hatching of Daenerys' dragons is one of the most iconic moments in A Song of Ice and Fire. It occurs at the end of the first book, A Game of Thrones, on the funeral pyre of her husband, Khal Drogo. Daenerys, consumed by grief and anger, walked into the flames with the dragon eggs, and when the fire died down, she emerged unharmed, with 3 newly hatched dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion. These dragons, first to be born in nearly 150 years, marked the return of magic to the world. They were small at first, no larger than cats, but they grew rapidly, becoming more fearsome with each passing year. Daenerys named them after the three most important men in her life: Drogon after her late husband Drogo, Rhaegal after her brother Rhaegar, and Viserion after her older brother Viserys. These dragons became Daenerys' most powerful weapons, symbols of her claim to the Iron Throne, and the means by which she intended to reclaim her family's legacy. Drogon is the largest and most aggressive of Daenerys' dragons. He has black scales and red eyes, and his flames burn hotter than those of his brothers. Drogon is often seen as the reincarnation of Balerion the Black Dread, sharing the same fierce temper and immense size. Throughout the series, Drogon proves to be fiercely loyal to Daenerys, protecting her from numerous threats, and aiding her in her quest to conquer the cities of Slaver's Bay. Drogon is instrumental in Daenerys' conquest of Meereen, and he becomes her mount in the later books, carrying her into battle against her enemies. Drogon's temper and strength make him a force to be reckoned with, and he is responsible for some of the most dramatic moments in the series. Rhaegal is the middle dragon, with green and bronze scales and orange eyes. He is named after Rhaegar Targaryen, Daenerys' older brother, and is often seen as the most level-headed of the three dragons. Rhaegal is less aggressive than Drogon, but he is still a formidable creature, capable of unleashing devastating blasts of fire. Throughout the series, Rhaegal remains close to his mother, participating in many of the same battles and campaigns as Drogon. Viserion is the smallest of the three dragons, with cream and gold scales and blue eyes. He is named after Viserys Targaryen, Daenerys' older brother, who was killed early in the series. Viserion is known for his curiosity and playfulness, but he is no less deadly than his brothers. Like Rhaegal, Viserion is loyal to Daenerys, and plays a significant role in her conquests. Beyond the Wall, in the frozen wastes of the far north, there are legends of creatures even more terrifying than the dragons of Valyria, ice dragons. These creatures, if they exist, are said to be as large as the dragons of old, but with scales of pure white and eyes of pale blue that burn with an icy coldness. Their breath is not fire, but a freezing wind that can turn men to ice in an instant. Ice dragons are the stuff of legend, and many maesters believe them to be nothing more than tales told to frighten children. However, the wildlings and the people of the north speak of them as if they are real, and some even claim to have seen these great beasts flying against the backdrop of the northern lights. Unlike their fiery counterparts, ice dragons are creatures of cold, born from the very heart of winter. It is said that they are drawn to the wall, where the magic of the ancient Night's Watch keeps them at bay. Some believe that the wall was built not just to keep out the wildlings and the others, but also to protect the realms of men from the ice dragons. There is little concrete evidence to support the existence of ice dragons, but in a world where the dead can walk and dragons can be born from fire, their existence cannot be entirely ruled out. The possibility that these creatures could one day awaken from their slumber in the frozen north adds another layer of mystery and danger to the world of Westeros. While the dragons of Valyria and the ice dragons of the north are the most famous of their kind, there are also legends of other, lesser-known dragon-like creatures that once roamed the world. Sea dragons and worms are two such creatures, both of which have left their mark on the history and folklore of Westeros and beyond. Sea dragons are enormous sea serpents that are said to dwell in the deepest parts of the ocean. Unlike the dragons of Valyria, sea dragons are not known to breathe fire, but their immense size and strength make them just as deadly. There are tales of sea dragons attacking ships, dragging them beneath the waves with their massive coils, and even of them battling with the leviathans of the deep. One of the most famous sea dragons in Westerosi folklore is Naga, a legendary beast slain by the Grey King of the Iron Islands. According to legend, the Grey King slew Naga with a blade of dragon glass and made her bones into his throne. The Ironborn revere Naga as a symbol of their strength and fearlessness, and her bones are said to still rest in the halls of the Grey King's castle. Worms are another type of dragon-like creature, although they are more akin to giant serpents than true dragons. Worms do not have wings and cannot fly, but they are still dangerous predators. There are tales of worms living in the deep places of the world, burrowing through the earth and emerging to devour anything in their path. Some maesters believe that worms are a type of degenerate dragon, creatures that have lost their wings and adapted to life underground. One of the most infamous worms in Westeros is the Firewyrm of the Caves of Nun's Deep, a massive creature said to haunt the caverns beneath the Eyrie. This worm is said to breathe fire like a dragon, and its lair is rumoured to be filled with the bones of its victims. Whether the fireworm truly exists, or is just a tale told to scare children, is unknown, but the fear it inspires is very real. Dragons in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire are more than just creatures of myth. They are symbols of power, destruction, and rebirth. Their return marks the resurgence of magic in the world, a reminder that the forces of nature and the supernatural are never truly gone, only dormant. The dragons are also a reflection of the Targaryens themselves, embodying both their greatness and their flaws. The Targaryens are a family defined by their connection to the dragons, and this bond is both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. The dragons give the Targaryens the power to conquer and rule, but they also bring destruction and chaos in their wake. The Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war that nearly destroyed the family, is a testament to the dangers of unchecked power, a power that the dragons symbolize. The return of the dragons with Daenerys marks the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Westeros, one where the old rules no longer apply, and the forces of magic and prophecy take center stage. The dragons are a wild card, an unpredictable element that can change the course of history in an instant. They are both a blessing and a curse, a force of nature that cannot be controlled, only harnessed. The dragons of Westeros are creatures of legend, born from the fires of Valyria, and forged in the crucible of conquest and war. They are the embodiment of the Targaryen family's power and ambition, creatures of fire and blood whose legacy is woven into the very fabric of Westerosi history. From Balerion the Black Dread to Drogon, the dragons have shaped the fate of kingdoms and the lives of those who seek to rule them. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, a tale of power and its consequences, and a reminder that even the mightiest of creatures can fall. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did putting it together, and if you like this new form of content, please let us know, and we will engage in more introspective examinations of the fantasy worlds you love. There may be more tales to tell within the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, but in the meantime we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.